Andrew Weissmann is back with me, and joining the conversation is Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna of California. So, Congressman, I mean, this is clearly a sideshow. I mean, there's some aspects are absurd. The matching ties, Lauren Boebert being left behind, it's all a little funny. But my gut here is this is a pretty clear sign of what they are willing to do for Trump. I mean, enable him as they did in 2020. What sticks out to you here?
Well, what's sad is there's no pride or independence in being in Congress, Article 1 of the Constitution. You know, when I was elected in 2016, the same year as Trump, you had members of Congress on the Republican side who used to snicker at embarrassing statements Trump made or apologize or almost be embarrassed. Today, that has totally changed. Donald Trump is stronger in his hold on the Republican Party than he ever has been. And they basically have to go pledge fealty to him. They want to be in his cabinet. They want to curry favor with him. They want to audition for being his running mate. It's just sad.
Andrew, don't worry, I'm not going to ask you about the red tie matching strategy. I did want to ask you about the legal aspect here, because, I mean, there's some reporting that Trump was seen making edits to the remarks that his surrogates delivered. They've clearly been out there kind of making arguments on his behalf, saying things that he can't. Trump's gag order specifically prohibits him from directing others. That's in there to make public statements like this. Is there any legal ramifications, or this is just there aren't really, and there's just going to be more of a parade in the coming days?
Well, in order to find a violation, there would have to be a hearing where witnesses could connect what the folks were saying to instructions from Donald Trump. I mean, obviously there were, but whether the DA and the judge are going to be interested in doing that is another thing. I suspect they won't. But I do think your point in the introduction is the key one here, which is the tearing down of institutions. And when I think about this week, I think that you have to look at what Donald Trump says about the criminal justice system, about law enforcement, and you can see a direct line to the sort of mini-me people showing up at the courthouse, to Justice Alito with flying a flag upside down and saying in the Supreme Court that the reason presidents should not be criminally charged because you really can't trust the criminal justice system or the Department of Justice. To me, this is the through line of an enormous strain of anti-law enforcement, anti-institutionalism that goes from the Supreme Court to Donald Trump and through a swath of Congress as well.
It's so important to call that out, and I'm so glad you double tapped on that, because this is not normal. Partisan Republicans, Democrats do not typically attack institutions in the judicial system as like what we've seen over the past several months and years. I also wanted to ask you, Congressman, we heard Senator Tommy Tuberville, who said the quiet part out loud, which we can only expect from him. He also said he was disappointed in the, quote, supposedly American citizens in that courtroom. I mean, it seemed very clear he was speaking about members of the jury. He later claimed otherwise, but that also feels to me and sounds to me like the echoes of Trump language. But what did you make of those comments?
That, to me, was the most shocking of anything that was said. I mean, you have Tommy Tuberville attacking American citizens as not American, and that's the whole Trump campaign. I mean, he said that immigrants are poisoning the blood of America, and this campaign that he's running is about deciding who passes the fealty test for being a true American, and then if you're not for Donald Trump, you're not American. But I actually think this is going to end up helping President Biden, because at the end of the day, people are sick of the insults. They're sick of the character attacks, the personal attacks. We had all of that happening in the Oversight Committee. And one of the things people agree on is that President Biden is a decent human being, that he cares, that he respects the other side. And at the end of the day, I think people are going to choose that over all this chaos.
Andrew, we know, I mean, the jury is not supposed to be consuming things outside of the courtroom, of course, but all of this is happening right outside, as are many other things. Is this something, I mean, having these high-profile Republican lawmakers out there doing this, that you worry about if you're the prosecution, that the jury might consume, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, so they clearly are worried about it. There was a sidebar the other day where the prosecution raised the issue of these people tromping in and out of the courtroom in a way that was quite visible to the jury, and trying to get the judge to preclude that, to have them in their seats and not doing this. I'm reminded of during the Manafort trial in Virginia, the former president, who was then the president, was tweeting about the trial and clearly was banking on the fact that some of the jurors would be seeing that and it would affect them. I strongly suspect that we will have the same thing happen here as the case closes up this week with summations and then jury deliberations. And if I'm the prosecution and the really eminent judge here, who has just been doing a wonderful job, that's going to be the final thing that they have to worry about, is essentially a form of jury tampering by the former president of the United States.
This is something you've been warning about from the beginning, even before this. Before I let you both go, I mean, Congressman, I wanted to ask you, Lauren Boebert defended Trump from claims that he's been sleeping in the courtroom. Here's what she said in exchange with Congressman Robert Garcia.
We know that he's too tired and sleepy to stay awake through his own criminal trial. It's not President Biden who's not sharp. It's, in fact, Donald Trump.
Mr. Garcia, maybe you could just lift up that picture of our President Trump sleeping. As you say, I think he's praying. But if he is sleeping, he certainly looks pretty while he sleeps.
It's a lot to unpack there. It's a large picture of Trump. What did you make of that exchange, Congressman?
Well, I think while the Republicans are engaged in a clown show of trying to defend the character of Donald Trump, President Biden is focused on actually going to places like Wisconsin, to Ravine, Wisconsin, to announce new factories and new investments in data centers. You remember the hoax of Donald Trump talking about Foxconn that never came. President Biden is delivering. And, it doesn't make the headlines, but what President Biden is doing is focusing on real issues that voters care about while Republicans are engaged in antics. And that, I think, is ultimately going to prevail.